afternoon, everybody. My name is Will Maynor. I'm an MEP specialist at Microdesk. I've been here I literally just had my 12th anniversary today. So if you guys are regular Microdesk customers, it's very likely we've talked in the past, either through a tech support or through a conference call or even through training. And I'm here today with Eric Rudisale, who is another MEP specialist on our application development team who's been working very hard over the last year, polishing up some of his own tools and some of the Revit widgets that we've developed internally at Microdesk to aid some of the process of duct and pipe and fabrication modeling. And without further ado, I'm going to transfer it over to Eric right now, and he's going to introduce himself.
Thanks, Will. Hi, everybody. As Will just pointed out, let's see, I'm going to show my screen here. We've been working together the past year to develop the Microdesk Accelerator Toolbar, which is a free add-on for Revit. Currently, it's restricted to Revit 2018. This is just the first release. Subsequent releases will probably expand the years that the toolbar is meant to work with. And real briefly, I'm just going to talk about sort of the first simplest things you'll see when you first install the accelerator and go to use it. So it can be downloaded from the Autodesk App Store, which everybody should be familiar with. And it has a normal installer like any other piece of software. Once it's installed, when you first start up Revit after the installation, you'll see this dialog pop up, which I believe everybody should be able to see my screen right now.
Yep, sure can.
And what this dialog is saying is that while the tool is free, all we're asking from you in exchange for the tool is that you sort of register it with us. So just enter any valid email address here. I'll go ahead and type mine in. And then you have a choice of whether or not you want to contribute to our sort of usage statistics. This is totally optional, but you should know that it really helps us understand which tools are people getting a lot of value out of, and even like which tools are people maybe struggling with, which tools kind of don't end up kind of running to completion. So if you're willing to contribute, just leave this "sure, I'll help improve the tools" checkbox checked, and you hit OK. You'll see a little dialog pop up. Sometimes it moves around, but it'll say "thank you for registering." You hit OK again, and then once Revit completes opening, you'll see a new tab gets added across the top. So as Will pointed out, the motivation is really just to kind of improve some workflows. Most of the improvements are around Revit MEP, although some of the tools, and Revit MEP and fabrication, although some of the tools can be applied more generally to other workflows.
And while that's starting up real quick, I'd like to mention that as a consequence of registering, we at Microdesk have a lot of other widgets that we've developed and are sitting in our back pocket that they're kind of waiting to polish up, and we've got a lot of ideas based on customer comments. So the more folks we have register, the greater interest that we see in the toolbar. It gives us a lot more opportunity internally to schedule the time to polish up some of these apps and then publish them to the public.
That's a really good point. The more interest and sort of engagement we get, the more likely we are to continue growing the offering. So the first couple tools that I want to demo are really the simplest things on the Microdesk toolbar, the accelerator. The first one is called Flip Multiple, and very simply, objects sometimes have a work plane or like a handedness to them, and they have this flip work plane button. But as I'm sure many of you have encountered, you can only do that on one object at a time. And so Flip Multiple does exactly what you might expect. If I have multiple of these outlets all selected at the same time, I'm holding Control while I select a few of these. And if I then run Flip Multiple on all three, it flips them all across their like insertion axis. So depending on what you're doing and what you're modeling, maybe you're modeling lights in an RCP and they're going to be mounted upside down to ceilings or something like that, this can be a real handy tool and save you quite a bit of time. And the second thing I want to point out is another really simple tool called Sum Parameters. And it's a tool that's meant to be very, very generic in its application. So it might have some limitations, but the key is that it doesn't require any configuration, any sort of like careful manipulation. It's on the Microdesk toolbar, or ribbon tab, and it's under this parameters panel. And I'm just going to select these three cable trays, for example, and run the sum parameters tool. And what it does is it actually dynamically looks at the like numeric parameters on the objects you have selected. It checks to see what parameters exist on all of the objects you have selected, and then just displays their sum. So in this case, if we wanted the sum of the length of these three cable trays, we could see the sum of the length of those three pieces is right there, 137. To show a different example of how it can change the parameters that are being displayed, let's say I wanted information about kind of the rooms in this corner of the building. I will hold Control while selecting a few rooms, and then run the tool again. And here we see a totally different list of parameters because rooms have different parameters than cable trays, and these are all the numeric parameters that are relevant to rooms. Some of them, it doesn't have a lot of meaning to sum the value, like computation height, for example. That's not a terribly meaningful value, but there's a lot in here that is. The specified power load of those three rooms summed would be really valuable. The total heat gain per person summed could be useful, as well as the, let's see, actual lighting load. So there's a lot of values here that when summed together can provide useful feedback about your design. Really quickly, no configuration, it's pretty straightforward. So those are the two simplest tools on the toolbar, and I'm going to hand it back to Will, actually, to demo the 3D drafting abilities.
All right, thank you. And once you make me the presenter, then I will, I'll jump in there. But I just want to kind of reiterate a comment. Let's see. And I think you might actually have to make me the presenter.
Let me choose the other one.
There we go.
Cool.
And I just want to add to a comment. Eric repeated a couple times that a lot of the tools here are very simple, and that's by design. It's not an apology. So in other words, a lot of the add-ins that we put on the ribbon bar are based around the concept that if we're modeling duct or pipe inside of Revit, and you might disagree with me, but we believe the tools inside of Revit are really, really fantastic right out of the box. And when you start deconstructing some of the frustrations that a lot of clients of ours voice, especially new users, they're often based around first training, but that's not the big thing. Really, there's a couple kind of minor core concepts that are related to 3D modeling that are quite simply solved. So in other words, the tools aren't really meant to reinvent the way that you model. They're really meant to like close a couple small minor gaps that the software has out of the box. And I'm going to put a pin in that comment for a second. I'm going to demonstrate some of the tools, and hopefully through that demonstration we connect some of the dots. But just really quick, if I don't get to it again, Eric was showing you that flip multiple command, and things like taps on ducts actually behave like hosted families. And the tool itself does something pretty cool where it will actually filter out non-hosted families. And what that allows me to do is I can just draw a window select around things that include takeoffs and taps. And I can come in here and I can say, we want to flip multiple. The selection set doesn't go away, but you can see all of the taps in that selection set get flipped. The duct, and these are non-hosted air terminals, get ignored, so nothing gets broken. So at Microdesk, we do a lot of modeling internally. So we model for subcontractors, we model for designers, we do a lot of staff augmentation. And as consultants, we have to pay attention to the things that are taking our team a lot of time. And one of the big things is we find that as we're coordinating, we spend a lot of time cutting sections and adjusting the visibility graphic settings of sections. And it's a lot of work that goes into something that doesn't put work on the page. It doesn't get us any closer to the finish line. So we kind of say to ourselves, if we could take our team out of the floor plans and out of the sections, if they could model in 3D, then they'd be much quicker, because then we could spot the obstructions and we could route around them. But we just need a couple things that kind of help us out. So The first tool we've got in the toolbar is called Bloom, and what that allows me to do is to select a piece of mechanical equipment, a duct fitting, a pipe accessory, and what it'll do is it'll extend a relative amount of duct and pipe out all of the open connectors. So what that allows me to do is I can come in and I can, I want to stretch that back, and maybe I'll cap the open end using an out-of-the-box command. And we can continue drafting without having to do that right-click on each of the connectors. And in reality, this is based on the fact that I think some of my favorite tools out of the box with Revit are the trim and extend commands. So just having a piece of pipe come out of here to give me something to bite onto with the trim command is going to save me a bunch of time. And I can come in here and maybe I've changed the width to 22 inches. And then at that point, I might not need to route my duct or my pipe in 3D. So we've got some tools up here that are going to kind of do basically a smaller piece of Revit's routing preferences. Like, for example, if I wanted to draw an elbow right, I'm going to click on the end of the duct, and the tool is going to assume that the user is looking towards the open end of the duct. So a right-hand turn would kind of push me this way. And say, for example, you wanted to, like, we're routing around an obstruction, or maybe this was pipe, and I was drawing an expansion loop. I could come here and I could do an elbow left. I could do another elbow left, and then finally an elbow right. Okay. And then at that point, maybe I'm not too concerned. Maybe I'm a designer, so I'm not too concerned about the precise distance. I just need to get in the ballpark of 3 to 4 inches away from structural steels. And if I crush maybe if I crush the insulation a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. But this at least gives me something to bite onto, and then I can use the drag and drop. Or I could use the arrow keys on the keyboard, and I can nudge things, and that gets me approximately where I need to be. If we needed to route around something, I could do an elbow down, an elbow right. We could elbow back up. And now we're going this way. Then we elbow in the opposite direction. And then we get kind of like a loop here where I might even come in and say, we want to bring that offset up a little bit. It's possible, too, that we might want connections to abut each other. So maybe we've got a couple TDC elbows that we're going to connect them right to each other. There's a command up here under the connecting section called MoCo or Move Connect. What that allows you to do is click on an object that's in the right place and click on an object that you want attached to the first object. And what it does is it calculates the two most likely closest connectors, and then it closes the connection. So then I can come in here and I can tap through the duct. And you can see everything that I connected there is connected. The duct on the other end of the loop here that I broke is not. So I just run that command again. And I connect those two guys. They don't move, but I can tap through and verify that the duct run is connected. So the tools work for duct, but I think the best bang for the buck we're going to get is from sloped sanitary lines. Because kind of as a consultant, this is where we hear sort of the lion's share of everybody's frustration. And part of the problem, I think, for us is that if we're connected sloped pipe lines, and I want to trim and I want to extend pipe together, the real challenge is that at any given point where there's an intersection of a sloped line, these two pipes have to meet together at a very specific coordinate. And that's what prevents the trim and extend command from working. So if we can use tools like that move and connect to kind of prevent ourselves from having to do that extend, then I think we're going to be able to let designers work in kind of a workflow that's kind of more akin to designing. So what I mean by that is that maybe early in the design phase, I go through and I lay out all of my floor drains. So I'm just going to use Revit's out-of-the-box create similar command and place a floor drain. We can use the Bloom command to extend the pipe out from below it. Now keep in mind, the Bloom command's not necessarily going to know what pipe type we want. So if I'm drawing underground hub and spigot, for example, then maybe what I could do is use Revit's out-of-the-box match properties command. I'm using the keyboard shortcut MA Motel Alpha. to match properties so that now we've got a hub and spigot pipe that's going to automatically insert combination-wise. I'm going to set the system to match, where plumbing sanitary. And then at that point, I might want to come in and place a P-trap. So I'm going to put a pipe fitting in, and we'll see what we've got in here for P-traps. There's my hub and spigot. And now Revit generally will do a pretty nice job of connecting the P-trap to the bottom of a vertical pipe. But if you've been using Revit for a while, you know that, there's some percentage of the time where there's so much pipe available in the view that Revit can't figure out what to attach to. So then you might just go and you manually place a P-trap. And we want to make this connection. So we've got another tool up here. If we were to just do a move and connect, there's no connector on the P-trap that's matching directions with the pipe drop. But what we can do is we can use this command called move connect align. And what it'll do is it'll just find the two closest connectors, and it'll rotate the second object so that the closest connector is oriented in the opposite direction of the first. And then it makes that connection so I can tap through. At that point, I might need to rotate, but we can do that using the kind of the rotate button right there. I might do a create similar command and snap to the end of my P-trap. I hit the space bar carefully one time so that it inherits the correct offset. And then I can come up here and I can say, well, I'm going to slope down at 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. I'll come off in this direction, and then we've got our sloped pipe. We're going to pay very close attention to the slopes, because one of the biggest frustrations we hear from folks is that after they start editing sloped connected pipe systems, the slopes inexplicably change. So we want to make sure that the tools aren't going to affect any of the slopes that we've already drawn. Once I've got the P-trap and I've got my floor drain and P-trap in, maybe before we connect any further, I might want to put a vent line in. So what I can do is I can take my pipe, and maybe I'm going to change it to a pipe type that automatically inserts a T instead of a Y. And then I can use a create similar command, CS on the keyboard. And what I'll do is I'll snap to the pipe that we've already drawn. I'll hit the space bar to inherit the offset at that location. I'm going to come up to the slope, and in this case I'm sloping up. Say we want to roll off the crown of that pipe at a 45-degree angle. What I'll do is I'll just use a slope of 12 inches over 12 inches. And I'm going to come right off at a 90 degrees. And then Revit will put that pipe in with the slope. And now I can continue upward. I'm not sure if we're going to slope the vent, but let's actually slope the vent to make our lives a little bit harder. And you know something? I might have actually drawn at a weird angle, so I'm going to have to be more careful. And maybe before I go any further, I'm going to change this to, we don't want a 4-inch. Maybe we'll do like a 2-inch vent. I'll draw a pipe. We're sloping up at 1/8 of an inch equals over a foot. I'm going to be very careful not to snap to anything. And then we get something like that. And now it's possible we just want that elbow to nest into the T. So just like we did with the that duct drop, I can delete the pipe that I drew, use the move and connect command, and we know these two connectors are aligned in the right direction. So moving and connecting will nest the two fittings like they might actually be placed out in the field. And then at that point I could use the elbow up command, and eventually this guy is going to, we're going to attach that to a vent line on a different floor. Okay. So here we've got a slope, here we've got a slope, and maybe we want that sanitary T to connect right to the P-trap, so I can delete that pipe again and do a move and connect. And this pipe maintains its slope, and the vent pipe maintains its slope. So at this point now, we run into that problem that I described earlier. If I want this branch line to connect into the main, the challenge here is, I'd really like to use Revit's out-of-the-box extend command and have it automatically put a T in. But these guys would have to line up perfectly for that to work. So maybe what I'll do instead is I'll take this pipe. Actually, I'll take this guy. This is still a combination-wise. I'll create similar, snap, space bar. I'm still sloping up at 1/8 of an inch. And I'm just going to draw some arbitrary length coming off. I'm going to take this guy, delete it, and then on the Microdesk toolbar, I'll use the move and connect command, assuming that the combination Y is in the right place and the pipe is what we want to move to it. Then it stretches the pipe and maintains the slope. Okay. And we actually could have done a nicer job too. If I'd gone to a floor plan, I could have made it so that this, my floor train didn't move north and south, but rather, it maintained its Y direction and only moved in the Z. And then, of course, it's possible too that maybe, we've got a below ground drainage pipe here. We've got some, perforated PVC, and maybe we need to route around that. So if I just use Revit split command, SL is the keyboard shortcut, and I create a gap for myself, then what I can do is I could come here and maybe I'm going to draw a pipe again at that 12-inch over 12-inch slope. And that puts the 45 in. And then what I might do is maybe it makes sense for me to go to a floor plan now. I can select previous to show me where I was, and I'll zoom right in there. And maybe in this case it does help me to draw a section because I would like to see exactly how high over that perforated PVC we are. So on the Microdesk toolbar, we've got a pipe and duct section tool. And the idea is that, I described earlier that we don't want to be cutting sections, but that just because we don't want to doesn't mean we shouldn't, and there aren't going to be cases where we do need to cut sections. So what we try to do here is we want to eliminate some of the frustrations with cutting sections. The ones where you click on, you pick two lines to draw a section, and it draws a section whose extents extend, 30 meters beyond the scope of the building. In this case, what we do is we cut a very small section box, and if I open that up, it's going to start at the level of the floor we're looking at. So right now it looks like the section is empty, but keep in mind we're drawing all below ground pipe. So if I take my section, it's very easy for me to take a small section and stretch it out if I'm working inside of a very large model than it is for me to start on a large section and shrink it in. So that's the concept. Even though nothing appeared initially, it's a little bit easier for me to stretch down and stretch right if we've got a small view. And in this case, I guess I had more room than I thought, but hypothetically, what I could do is I could take this branch line, and I'm using the Shift key up arrow just to nudge that a little bit. And like I said earlier, I really like the out-of-the-box Revit commands, like trim, for example. Whoops. That's going to allow me to connect those guys together. Now what's interesting is when I nudged that up, it looks like maybe my pipe moved a little bit in a direction. So maybe what I can do is I can just take this pipe, and we're going to continue that 1/8 of an inch slope just like we did before. And I'm not going to worry too much about it. I'm going to use the move and connect command to do something like that. And let me go back to my 3D view real quick. We'll do one more thing, and then I'll hand it back over to Eric. So it's possible, too, that beyond the floor train, maybe we need to do like an elbow up, and we need to put like a combination double Y in here. So maybe the first thing I'll do is we might have a different pipe type that could automatically insert some Ys. So we snap, hit the space bar. I'm coming up at 1/8 of an inch. We're doing 45. We're coming here. And then we go and we do our, our elbow up. And then at that point, maybe we need to do, like I said, a double combination Y or some other type of pipe fitting. So I'll use my pipe fitting command. And we're looking for some type of cross. I see a polypropylene version. I see a no hub. So I'm not finding my cast iron. So maybe for the sake of speed, we're going up above ground now. So maybe this makes sense that we put a no hub in. So I can put in something like that. and then I use my Move, Connect, Align to get it up. Just keep in mind that the Move, Connect, Align is not changing pipe sizes. To go back to Eric's comment earlier on, the key here is we want to make the tools as simple as possible. And the more, how would I describe this? The smarter we attempt to make the tools, the more things they do wrong. Or, yeah, maybe that's a poor way of putting it. We want our tools to be simple, straightforward, and most importantly, predictable. So if they start kind of using complicated logic in the back end, then for me as an end user, it becomes kind of impractical, unpredictable, and frustrating. And those are the things we want to prevent happening. So in any case, I would have to change this. If it is a 4-inch, I'll have to change it to a 4-inch. We can use a Move, Connect, Align, and we can bring that up. And maybe at that point, I could use the bloom kind of to bring it back around. The bloom command would work on a pipe fitting too. And then we could kind of extend that up. And if my pipe was aligned, I would be able to use an out-of-the-box trim command to get that all connected. All right. So again, just to reiterate real quickly, we do have a number of more kind of simple, little useful tools like this that we keep in our back pocket, and some of our regular customers know about them. The more interest we get in the Microdesk toolbar, the more freedom that gives Eric and I internally to enhance the toolbar for future versions, or even if we needed to make a 2017 version. The level of interest in this is what's going to give us the power to keep it going. All right, so with that said, Eric, are you still there?
I am indeed.
All right, well, I am going to make you the presenter.
Okay. Looks like maybe you need to choose the other presenter, other presenter.
Share. And this is harder than it looks. There it is.
Cool. I've got show my screen now. Great. So can you see my screen now?
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. So I'm going to show now the last tool of the Accelerator toolbar, and it's called Para-Pusher up at the top. This is, again, sort of trying to address a very typical problem that people encounter all the time and trying to find a way to do it kind of like as simply as possible. There's this philosophy in programming that's like, try to make small, sharp tools that do one thing quickly. And that's sort of, I think, kind of a theme of a lot of these tools that we've made. They're small, they do very discrete tasks, but when you string them together, I think you saw in Will's drafting example, they can become really powerful and actually together save you a lot of time. So the Para-Pusher is along that theme, but it's solving a slightly more complex problem. And the problem we want to solve is adding parameters to families. I'm sure lots of people here have encountered this problem, but I'll just kind of summarize the situation. If we have a family that perhaps is part of our library while we're developing our standards, or perhaps it's downloaded as content from a vendor, often we need these families to contain certain shared parameters so they play nicely with things like our schedules and our tags. And just to illustrate that point, here's a mechanical equipment schedule. And if we look at this tankless, this water heater tankless row, we see there are 5 parameters to the right of this family column. And for each of these, I'm clicking and trying to edit these values, and I'm unable to do that. So I'm not able to do that because this family doesn't have the shared parameters that we need. If I highlight this element in the model real quick and edit it, I'm just going to show you the sort of process you might have to encounter when you do this. So to add shared parameters to a file, you need the correct list of shared parameters you wanted. and you would edit the family, which can be done here from the ribbon. You then go to editing the family types, where you see a list of parameters you can add. I'll say add a new parameter, I choose shared parameter, I select one. I have to make sure I have the correct shared parameter file referenced. So let's choose the one I set up for this demo. And now I have a list of shared parameters grouped into these parameter groups where I would have to go through and choose the correct one, hit accept. Sorry, that was the list of all shared parameters. Choose the correct parameter, choose type or instance, hit OK. Repeat that process 5 times until I've added my 5 parameters. Then I hit OK, and then finally I can load into the project and stop editing the family. So that would be, for a single family, I would need to go through that process of clicking through those multiple dialogues for shared parameters over and over. Now, 5 parameters is totally reasonable. Lots of schedules have 5 parameters, but it can get even worse than that. And on top of that, you can have multiple families that need this problem solved. So what we've decided to do is there's lots of reasons to add shared parameters to a family, but we figured we would tackle making families schedulable with your company's standard schedules first. So the goal of ParaPusher is really to say that given a schedule of parameters, the schedule of parameters and families, I want to make these families work with this schedule. So when I click ParaPusher, it's going to open up a small dialog. This is the first kind of UI we've seen on the accelerator because there's actually a few choices we need to make. One is which of the parameters do we actually want to add? So over on the left-hand side, we see a list of all the shared parameters inside this schedule. And so the first question is, which ones do we want to add? And I can choose to add or not add lots of parameters. Let's try just adding the serial number parameter. The second column is whether or not it's an instance parameter. So there are instance and type parameters, and you need to be able to make a kind of reasonable choice about whether or not you want an instance or type parameter for each of these things. So we'll go ahead and leave that as instance for now. If you uncheck it, that's going to be type. The opposite of instance is type. And then over on the right-hand side, we see a list of all the families that exist inside the project, or this schedule rather. And we can choose which families we actually want to modify. So I'm going to not choose all of them. I'm going to choose just that tankless water heater again. I'm going to go ahead and click accept just to illustrate adding a single parameter as an instance value for the tankless water heaters. Now, it's already opened the family in the background, made the change, and it's loading the family back in. And when it loads back into the project, we see the same dialog we normally do when editing families. We have these 2 choices, overwriting the existing version or overwriting the existing version as well as its parameter values. So you'll need to make the correct choice based on the modifications you've made to your family normally. In this case, these are brand new parameters, so there's no concern about them having the wrong parameter values. So now we see the serial number is actually available to me. So give it a number here, whereas previously that field wasn't accessible to me. The other families still don't have that field accessible. So that's great. That was, in some ways, it was easier to add that one parameter than it is natively. But the real power is when you add multiple parameters to multiple objects. So let's try to finish up the tankless and the outdoor AHU horizontal. Go to the ParaPusher again. We will say all the parameters. And I'm going to say this horizontal AHU and this tankless hot water heater. And I'm going to go ahead and click accept. And now this is the outdoor air handling unit. We'll overwrite that. And the next is the tankless hot water heater. And now with those 2 families loaded, we see I can add locations to all of these. I could say this is in a, a mech ring. And some parameters, especially numeric ones that have a specific kind of units, have to have a value. So we see that a 0 appeared for all of these. 0 is not a value that we inserted. It's just that when you have a numeric parameter, especially ones that have units, they have some value. They can't be kind of empty the way a text parameter can. So we were able to add, that was an additional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parameters spread amongst 2 families pretty quickly. And we could continue doing that for the rest of these. So I'm just going to illustrate another sort of way of using Parapusher. I'll go ahead and run it again. And first, I just want to note there is a small tutorial video. If you click How Does It Work, this will just bring you to a link of a tutorial video that's on the Autodesk Knowledge Network. So just to point out, if you're in the tool, you can actually see it being demoed with a very similar example to what you're seeing now. In addition, there's a checkbox here below families that says Save Families. So let's say I want to modify this water source heat pump. We'll do left return back discharge. So I'm going to modify this family, which currently I'm choosing kind of the 6th row down, doesn't have the parameters we need. And when I check Save Families, I get 2 choices, Save to Desktop and Save Over Original. So I can actually make the modifications to this family, save it to the desktop, and then make further edits or load it back in. So I'll go ahead and say, let's add all these parameters. Maybe we make the serial number a type parameter, for example, and let's choose to not add some things just for illustration. And I'll click Accept. Now, because we chose the Save to Desktop option, it should be doing 2 things. It's going to load the family in, as well as leave us a copy on our desktop, which I can show you in a moment. Actually, I won't be able to show you my desktop because the icons are being cleaned up by GoToMeeting. So let's look here for when it's done. So here we see that family's got these parameters added. They've been loaded in. I go to the desktop, I see the water source heat pump is right here. Left return, back discharge. So that's kind of the last of the utility parts of the Parapusher command. A couple things to note about the way it works. There are kind of 2 requirements. One, you'll get a pretty clear notification about. If I'm in any view beside the schedule, Parapusher will just not run. You need to be in a schedule to run Parapusher because that's how it chooses what schedule you want to operate with. The second might not always be immediately obvious, but it's important that you have the same shared parameter file that was used to produce the schedule you're working in. So this mechanical equipment schedule was created using a very specific shared parameter file, in this case, the Revit master shared parameter file here. And if I use a different shared parameter file in my project, then the tool will still run and it will still see the shared parameters that it's trying to add from the schedule. But when it goes to actually add them, it won't be able to because it needs that shared parameter file that contains the correct shared parameters in order to add them. So you might run into some complications where it seems like it's not adding the parameters it should, but that's because you don't have the shared parameter file that was used to make the schedule originally. So with that, I think that is all of the...
Yeah, I think that is. I think that went pretty well.
Cool. Should we open it up to questions, Will? Do you have any other thoughts?
I was just trying to open up questions, and they're showing up in a very... I answered one of them, but they show up in a very narrow box on my GoToWebinar, and I'm not sure if you figured out how to expand that box and look at them.
I think I can. You can drag that box out of the panel that it's nested in currently, and that can help. Of course, when I did that, the formatting got all crazy. So.
Oh, good. Okay, yeah. So first question: are we going to release a 2017 version?
Great question. There are some rumblings about that. So I don't want to commit to any dates right now, but we are, we've gone through about, I think, somewhere between 4 and 6 months of having this toolbar out there. We've gotten some good feedback, and I think we are interested in doing that. I'm sorry I can't commit to any timeline.
Yeah, so you know what boy, I'm going to get in trouble because there are Microdesk people listening, but you know what would help us to release the 2017 version is if you guys asked your sales rep and you let them know that, hey, we do have genuine interest in the tool, we are using it, and it would be very helpful to us to have a 2017 version. And we're very sensitive to the needs of our customers and to our sales reps in particular. But the sales reps have a unique role in Microdesk in putting pressure on getting things done, if that makes sense.
I totally agree. There is a question about why don't we recommend using project parameters for certain categories of objects, and Will did answer it in the chat, but I think I'll just elaborate kind of vocally. Project parameters are really good when you actually want a parameter on every object in a category. But something I've become sensitive to over the years is as you start to use more and more Revit schedules and you start to add parameters to the objects that are going to live in those schedules, you can kind of end up polluting other Revit families in your project with parameters that aren't relevant to them. So for example, if I was adding, secondary coil reheat water temperature to every mechanical equipment, well, now I've got like a lot of water heaters perhaps that are having that parameter, and I could have every VAV box having that parameter. There could be a lot of objects where now if I click on that object and I look at the properties, I'm kind of getting information that doesn't actually help me do design. It actually can clutter the design field. With regards to 2017 versus 2019, I think if you get 17, you'll probably get 19. That will be and we will try to grow in both directions.
So I think 19 has to come in any case. I think it's just a question of when.
Yeah.
And again, help us put some pressure on. Then it looks like the last question is kind of goes back to the one Eric just answered. The parameter pusher does put parameters in the family file, and it doesn't add them as project parameters. However, just to clarify, and I'm assuming here, Eric, so correct me if I'm wrong, it's not going back to overwrite the original file. Is that correct?
Correct. It is not unless you request that it do that. So in addition to when I think people can still see my screen. If you do want it to save over the original family as well, when you check this Save Families option, there's another choice to save over original. Now, it doesn't allow you to input a particular path, but perhaps you've all encountered the situation where when you go to close a family, so if you open a project, edit family, and then click Save, the family actually kind of knows the path that it came from. This would use that same field. It would save over the original, wherever that family kind of thinks that it came from. So you can save over the original if you want to.
Very cool.
So next question is, how much does it cost? Currently, it's for free on the App Store. So you need to go to app.autodesk.com, and you can just type in Microdesk to search for it, or Accelerator, because this is the Microdesk Accelerator. And everything you've seen today is totally free, restricted to Revit 2018. So currently, all these tools are free. I think all the tools you've seen today are slated to remain free. We are toying with sort of having another toolkit that might have some nominal cost with it, but currently, it's all yours. Go wild.
All right, very cool. And again, I don't think we've posted a URL, but if you go to the Autodesk App Store, or you even go to Google and type in Autodesk App, Microdesk Accelerator, we'll be the first hit.
Right, I can do that real quick just to show that we're really there. I don't want anybody to think we're making it up. So if I search for Microdesk, it's actually one of these autocorrects, Microdesk Accelerator in the App Store. And I just went to apps.autodesk.com to start.
And again, if everybody has continued interest in this, this will be something that we upgrade every year, and it will remain free. And this is something that we've been able to publish because of the popular demand of all of our customers. So if we see a large number of people registering it, well, I mean, not even a large number, but I think with continued interest, this will this is something that's stable and will continue to grow.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right.
Cool.
With that, I think we've answered all the questions.
We have. Yeah. The last question is a thank you, and I'd like to say you're welcome.
All right, guys. Thanks a lot. Then enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yeah, thanks you all.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye.